says that trade is top of mind during this historic summit in Beijing with President Xi. However, he does have a plan to have a long talk about Iran.
We have a lot of things to discuss. I wouldn't say Iran is one of them, to be honest with you, because we have Iran very much under control.
And on trade, here is what the president is walking into. China really wants lower tariffs. They currently have a 10% global tariff that expires in July unless the president decides to extend it. So that is on China's minds.
Several primaries were held in 2 states yesterday.
Shelley Moore Capito, with backing from President Trump, is headed toward another general election run after winning West Virginia's Republican Senate primary. Democrats picked Rachel Anderson to challenge her in November. Meanwhile, Carol Miller won the GOP primary in West Virginia's 1st congressional district, while Vince George captured the Democratic nomination. In Nebraska, incumbent Senator Pete Ricketts easily advanced through the Republican primary, while Democrats nominated Cindy Burbank, and Nebraska Governor Jim Pillen will also be back on the ballot this fall after winning the Republican gubernatorial primary. Democrats chose Lynn Walls to face him. Matt Murphy, Fox News.
Inflation is up to 3.8%, the highest since 2023. And House Speaker Mike Johnson says that's not great news for Republicans heading into the midterms.
Not good news, and real families are feeling that, and we're keenly aware of it, very sensitive to it here in Congress. We put together all the pro-growth policies in the big, beautiful bill, the Working Families Tax Cuts, to allow the U.S. economy to take off like a rocket, and we were doing that prior to the conflict in Iran. So now we've got to settle that out. The Strait of Hormuz is the big wild card here, and as soon as we get that done, I agree with the president. I think the prices come right back down to where they were. Remember that gas prices were at a 4-year low before that began, and we're beginning to see incredible growth in the economy. Other indicators are good, but you got to get the prices of groceries and gas down, and we're working every day to make sure that happens.
A CIA whistleblower is set to testify this morning before the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, following allegations that federal officials covered up details on the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri on what he's expecting from the hearing.
I understand that this CIA whistleblower is going to testify to, among other things, that the CIA and the government deliberately ignored the law that Congress passed. It was my bill that ordered the Biden administration to declassify everything, all the intelligence around the origins of COVID-19.
An education watchdog has published a new expose detailing how the Southern Poverty Law Center has been involved with far-left anti-racism curriculum.
The expose is from Defending Education. Paul Runco is Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives and K-12 programs at Defending Education. He said Southern Poverty Law Center sounds like a nice organization, but in reality, they're pushing DEI in schools.
The Southern Poverty Law Center became famous a few years ago when they started to put parent groups on what they call the hate map. And so basically calling parents who are speaking up at school board meetings, comparing them to groups like the KKK. And so they have a curriculum that they deploy for schools called Learning for Justice. It used to be called Teaching Tolerance. And a new report from Defending Education found that this curriculum was found in at least 42 states and Washington, D.C.
When asked what parents should do with this new expose, Runco recommended moms and dads be aware of what their child is learning in school.
If you come across a worksheet or an assignment in your children's school from the Southern Poverty Law Center or from, Learning for Justice or anything associated with them, it's worth taking a deeper look at what that content is. And also, looking at some of the social emotional learning programs or even district DEI policies that had been informed by the Southern Poverty Law Center. It's important for parents to know that these could exist in their school district and to let us know, and we can look in deeper and help parents figure out what to do next.
I'm Chris Woodward.
For American Family News, I'm Rusty P.
Tune in Saturdays at 1:30 Central for The Compass with host Rick Beggs and iVoter Guide President Debbie Wuthnow. Each weekend, The Compass will seek to navigate the public square with faith, truth, and conviction. Rick and Debbie will keep tabs on upcoming elections and remind us of the importance of our participation in them. The Compass reminds us that God is our true north. Be listening for The Compass, Saturday afternoons at 1:30 Central on American Family Radio. Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview. The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognized come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. It is Wednesday, May 13th, and the Pentagon has rolled out these releases declassifying UFO or unidentified flying object files, including videos and photos held by the government for decades. So this coming from NBC, the files have been a source of intrigue and fascination for generations of skeptical Americans wondering if we are alone in the universe. So the Pentagon on Friday began releasing never-before-seen files relating to unidentified anomalous phenomena, previously and more infamously known as UFOs, that the government has been holding on to for decades, and the release came nearly a month after President Trump gave a sneak preview of the possible contents, telling a conservative gathering that some very interesting documents would be released by the Department of War very, very soon. And so the release, according to the Department of War, says the release of declassified documents demonstrates the Trump administration's earnest commitment to unprecedented transparency. So what does this mean, though, for Christians? And so I've covered this topic. If you haven't listened to the program or read the op-ed that I wrote on this when this initially was announced by President Trump, that regardless of what we find in the universe, whether there is life or there is even sentient life, somewhere besides the planet Earth, which is highly unlikely, just given that we are we are a planet that is so fine-tuned in order to sustain life. But even if we find, an amoeba or life on Mars first, isn't it very interesting that if we found just one little tiny droplet in the universe, that scientists would suddenly say, look, there's life. But a fully developed child in the womb, well, you know what? That's questionable. That's not really life. That's just a fetus. That's just, something else. And so the cognitive dissonance is really incredible here. And I think we can take a moment to appreciate that and actually use that in our pro-life arguments. But overall, the theological point is that regardless of what is in the universe, God has already told us the purpose and the story and the redemption arc for humanity. And no matter what else we find out there, they or it or whatever will not be human beings that are subject to the same history and the same redemption and the same sin and need for a savior as the human race. And so all of the world, including the universe, has been cursed under sin. We know that. And the redemption story is for humanity specifically. But let's welcome in my fellow theologian and one of the only theologians, I think, who actually uses his political show to talk about theology regularly, which is why I so appreciate him, our good friend Steve Dace. So let's talk about your thoughts on aliens and what this means and actually doesn't mean for Christians and our view of salvation.
Well, I think we should approach this, Jenna, from two fronts. First, science, and then religion. Because I think they are both converging here. So if you look, let's start with science, and let's do a little math. The closest galaxy to ours is 160 quadrillion miles away. 167 quadrillion miles away. In terms of the amount of time it would take to even travel there by the speed of light, would essentially eclipse the entirety of known human history. The closest heavenly body that, as far as we know, scientists like to use the phrase "as far as we know" a lot, while then also claiming, though, that even though they're not really certain of many of their own certainties, that they are certain that they should dictate to us our moral code and how we should govern ourselves as a species. But I digress. As far as we know, the closest heavenly body capable of sustaining any form of complex life, even a single-celled organism, is Proxima Centauri b, an exoplanet that is about 12 trillion miles away from the Earth. The problem with Proxima Centauri b is that it is orbiting a red dwarf sun. And so it is constantly getting bombarded by solar flares and heavy radiation. In other words, it is very possible that small e evolution may have occurred in order to create some form of non-complex life. But the problem is its own ecosystem keeps blasting and irradiating it with radiation. So there's no photosynthesis, there's no carbon dioxide, oxygen exchange, and it just can never sustain itself. Then the closest solar system that we know of, as far as we know, again, they like to say that term a lot, with a yellow sun that has the right mixture, as you were pointing out a few minutes ago, how tightly wound we have to be for this formula to work. The closest solar system with a yellow sun is 16 trillion miles away. We have found no evidence in any of the bodies orbiting it of any complex life at all. And even if we had the speed of light, even if we had warp speed, like Star Trek, it'd take about 20 years to get there. When you run all this through the math, all right, even including the vastness of the universe, and so I did this with my Super Grok AI. We went through, I wanted to include theory of relativity, Kepler principle, all the various things that we currently, that science currently views as its theories of paradoxes, time travel, interdimensional travel, warp speed was accountable, if we could create Einstein, Rosencrantz bridges, otherwise known as black holes, okay? The odds that complex life would be traveling to the Earth and would be largely undetectable by humanity. And people are going to say, well, they would have technology that we don't understand. And of course they would, because we can't get to them. They'd have to come to us. But the problem is you're then, because I factored this into my equation as well, they have to perform perfectly, Jenna. They never crash. No one ever mispilots this many miles away. They're already coming here from beyond 16 trillion miles. They're already coming here from beyond that at a minimum. At a minimum, they're coming beyond 16 trillion miles. And so that equipment never fails. It never crashes. It never malfunctions. Any of the pilots never make a mistake. All right? The odds of that happening, you want to know what they are? The exact same odds that anyone within the sound of our voices is going to die by a vending machine this year. That's the odds.
Wow.
Okay? The odds you're going to die by a vending machine. All right? So you need an extraordinary amount more faith to believe in this than is required to believe that there was a man named Jesus who died on a cross and God supernaturally intervened into human history to raise him from the dead. The odds of that are way lower being true than the odds of this being true, which brings us to the religion question. I would urge your audience, there's a great, I'm going to say 10-part podcast series, and people are going to freak out. But, man, it's well produced. It's well done. All right? And it's by a Presbyterian minister named Colin Samuel. And it was done a couple of years ago. And his background, very similar to mine, grew up non-Christian, very interested in the occult, very interested in, alternative history and UFOs and things of that nature. I was the exact same way. And then went back after he became a believer and a minister and went back and examined some of the things he used to believe and their true origins. And, this guy walks through, for example, one of the leading engineers that launched the NASA program was a literal Aleister Crowley occultist. And there's a reason why when you listen to people like Stephen Greer and a lot of these folks that frequent all these shows and channels, even on the Fox Newses and Newsmaxes of the world, right? This guy Hector Elizondo is on these channels all the time. And I watch all their documentaries because I see this as a rival religion. I see this as every bit the religious competitor to our faith that Islam currently is. And Hector Elizondo will, in his latest documentary, the so-called whistleblower, will instantly dismiss. He even says in his latest documentary, I couldn't believe there were these religious fanatics in the Pentagon who thought these were demons. just immediately, and then completely dismisses it, but then goes out the rest of the way. And Stephen Greer does this as well. And so what they do is they hook you on scientific curiosity and the idea that, hey, there is something ingrained in us. The heavens declare the glory of God. There is something ingrained in us from the time that our ancestors in antiquity looked up into the outer rim of our atmosphere and thought, this is so majestic, and they worshipped those planets, okay, before they could explore them. There's something ingrained in us that we want to see. How did God do this? What is God? Where is God? What's beyond us? That's ingrained in us. But what ends up happening when they hook you on this, right? And they hook you, and I still am a sci-fi guy. I don't necessarily watch much of what Star Wars produces nowadays, but I loved all this stuff growing up, and to pass this on to my kids. But it's also called science fiction. Anyway, the thing that they hook you on is the fantastical, and then when you're hooked in, this is now when we get to the metaphysical, right? And you see this guy Ross Coulthart, who used to be basically the host of 60 Minutes Australia. This is all he covers now and all he does. And he takes groups of people out to this retreat in Southern California, and they literally go out there and they, quote, summon non-human intelligence. What kind of language is the term summoning often associated with? They will summon these things. Yeah, they will occultism. They will, Greer and others will talk about attaining a higher form of consciousness. And if you don't have this higher form of consciousness, you can't summon these things. And this is Gnosticism. Well, if you don't have this secret knowledge, if you don't know the mantra, if you don't know the formula, if you don't know the spell, and this knowledge is only for a select few, and then if you're lucky enough, they might pass it on to you. This is absolute Gnostic occultism without question. And I would really urge your audience to go listen to Colin Samuel's cultish 10-part series on the history of this entire thing and its origins to the occult. Almost every major UFO figure will eventually dabble in the occult. All right, they will eventually go from who are these beings from another world to I require another form of consciousness in order to access them. And one last thing I'll say before I turn it back over to you is Congressman Tim Burchett, who's a great congressman, by the way, from Tennessee. He's been the Republican leader on the committee on this for the last few years and has spoken all over the country and was in the disclosure video that Joe Rogan. There's a reason why everybody that loves this the most, by the way, all in the psychedelics and everything else and higher consciousness, not a coincidence, okay? And so I brought him on my show before last Christmas. And this, Jenna, I'm going to tell you, this is the weirdest interview. This is June 6th to be my 20th anniversary in this business. This is the weirdest interview I've ever done. This is like a scene out of the X-Files. In this interview, if you go back, I think it was December 15th or somewhere around there, if folks want to go in our archives. In this interview, there is somebody sitting behind Congressman Burchett the whole time that goes unidentified. I've never seen anything like that. I've interviewed presidents, people who want to be presidents, countless times. I've never had someone sitting in the background of the interview. It was very weird. When I began to ask him about biologics, and I'll explain that term here in a second, all of a sudden our feed went dead. And it took us, he was inside the congressional building, the Cannon Congressional Building. It took us another 8 to 10 minutes to finally connect with him. And the reason why I wanted to ask about biologics, because I keep saying when this topic comes up, show us the pilots. There is clearly unexplained phenomena. There is clearly technology being used that, as far as we know, as laymen and regular Americans, no country on earth has displayed that it has the capability of. The kind of technology that if the Chinese had it, if the North Koreans had it, if the Russians had it, if the Iranians had it, the dollar wouldn't be the default currency in the world anymore. All right? And there is documented phenomena cases of it often hovering around stations around the world that include weapons of mass destruction. So I don't deny that at all. I don't even see how it's possible we could deny that this phenomena exists. The question is, what is it and what are its origins? And this is why I always ask, show me the pilots. Why do we have all these compelling images of the craft, but never the pilots? How is this possible? And so I asked Congressman Burchett when we finally got him back on, I said, hey, you have seen even the stuff that's top secret people like us have not been able to see. Have you seen any compelling evidence of biologics, meaning who the pilots are, the actual biological material that is in charge of this phenomenon? And he flat out told me no. And notice that they never show us any biologics. And notice that they make claims about it, but they never have anything. And so I always say this to our audience, just tell people, come back to us when you show us the pilots. Otherwise, it's very likely, if not a metaphysical certitude, that this is a spiritual dimension and a form of occultic deception.
That it is fascinating, and to kind of distill that, everything that you just said, Steve, that's so incredibly important. Is that for Christians, we need to remember, well, there is a good and a healthy and an innate sense of discovery and a desire to understand our world and our universe and even ourselves, who we are as human beings made in the image of God. We need to remember we have to stay grounded in Scripture, grounded in truth, so that we do not become more fascinated with the discovery of whatever else is in the universe than we are fascination with the Creator.
Well, that's Romans 1, worshiping the creation and not the Creator, 100%.
Yeah. And so we have to remember that, it is okay to wonder about these things. I mean, a lot of people say because it's so weird and eerie and scary and, and it may be demonic in a lot of ways. And I think that spiritual side is the explanation for some of this phenomenon, that Christians should always stay away from it. And obviously we need to stay away from anything occult. We need to recognize what is spiritual and evil versus what is spiritual and truthful and good and holy and righteous. But in our sense of discovery and understanding, we can still look through these files, we can still ask all of these questions, and we should, but to stay grounded in truth and to not allow the fascination with what else is in the universe to override what God himself has already told us about humanity, about the redemption truth of our world, and also what happens at the end of all things in Revelation. I mean, I love talking about God as an author, and an author of a book doesn't give you the beginning, give you the whole story, and then just not conclude the book. And so God in the closed canon has given us the full story, and we can rely on that. We can believe that with confidence, which is hope. It's a patient expectation in the truth of what God has provided. And then within that context, we don't need to actually worry about whatever the UFO files contain or not, or whatever we may see or not, doesn't change the truth about the redemption truth of the gospel of Christ. And I think that's what is missing so much in these conversations about UFOs, is bringing it back to reality and also discussing the spiritual, because it's fascinating, Steve, because my dad works in aerospace and works in, with satellites and all kinds of things. And at one of the jobs that he had, there was a title of another scientist that was called Director of Exploration of the Universe. And I thought, isn't that hilarious? Like, that sounds like a Disney Fantasyland title or something. But it's like, these people who are brilliant scientists, but their goal is to figure out what God has already told us, rather than saying, let's go and discover so that we can understand more about the creation and the Creator. And that's often what's missing here.
Yeah, I'd be remiss if I didn't also plug my good buddy Billy Hallowell's latest feature over at CBN on the supernatural, and it gets into angels and demons. And there's a fantastic segment from Hugh Ross, the Christian scientist, who talks about when he was brought over with a group of scientists in the latter stages of the Soviet Union to do a scientific inquiry exchange for the first time. There was literally a department of Soviet science that was openly exploring the occult, looking for, essentially it's what our ancestors called alchemy, looking for alchemic metaphysical means, supernatural, paranormal means to create weapon systems to eclipse what the West and the United States had. And it's right, and he talks about the experiences of talking to this group, how openly hostile they were to him immediately because they knew that he was a Christian. I mean, that documentary is out right now, and I would be remiss if I didn't plug it because that also plays right into this conversation as well.
Amazing. Well, we've got to take a break here, Steve Dace, but I so appreciate your focus and emphasis on the truth of what we know about God. The study of God is literally theology, and to stay grounded in truth and to recognize a lot of the goals of a lot of these scientists that are nefarious, frankly, or maybe not even, they're not intending it to be, but we have to ensure that our knowledge and our discovery of this remains focused on truth. And there are some great resources out there as well. There's another great book and documentary called The Privileged Planet. If you want to focus on how fine-tuned our universe is to sustain life and how there is no way statistically that this could have just happened by chance. That is such an incredible resource as well. But follow Steve at The Blaze and on X, and we will be right back with more.
America was founded as a nation under God, but the U.S. Supreme Court has broken our national relationship with God. Many court rulings have contributed, but 3 stand out. In 1962, the court removed prayer from public schools. In 1963, the court removed Bible reading from public schools. And lastly, in 1980, the court removed the 10 Commandments from America's classrooms. The Supreme Court broke our relationship with God, and any restoration of that relationship must include the Supreme Court. And a vacancy on the Supreme Court could soon be coming. So please support AFA Action's urgent legal work to help President Trump select and the U.S. Senate confirm godly constitutional justices for the Supreme Court. We put thousands of hours of research into potential nominees. We use our networks at the Trump administration and the U.S. Senate to promote the good nominees and oppose the bad ones. AFA Action needs the resources of supporters like you to help maximize our efforts. So please visit afaaction.net to learn more and donate today.
This is Abraham Hamilton III with AFR, and we're sending Bibles. Here's Michael with Bible League International.
How do you hide God's Word in your heart if you've never even held it in your hands? Outside of the U.S., millions of Christians go without what is so basic to the Christian faith, and that is having a Bible. But you can do something about it today.
The need for a change is through the Word of God. It is so important for the Bible, the Word of God, to be made available in whatever languages that are needed by people.
People now are very open to hear the gospel.
Whoever comes our way and is able to give us a Bible, it will be better than giving us food to eat.
Millions of believers around the world are crying out for God's Word, something that you and I can access every day. So if you love your Bible, if God has used His Word to grow you, would you give that to others? We want to bless 5,000 waiting believers this month at $5 a Bible. $100 sends 20, $500 sends 100.
You can give by calling 800-YES-WORD, 800-YES-WORD, or visit sendbiblesnow.org. That's sendbiblesnow.org.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Starn. Stand by for news and commentary next. The owners of a celebrated barbecue joint in Kansas City now facing a firestorm of criticism from anti-Trump activists. All this because of a friendly exchange with President Trump at the White House. Mike and Joe Pierce are the founders of Slap Barbecue. They were seen in a video shared Monday on X by the White House. Now, the brothers were in D.C. for a small business summit when the president delivered remarks. But after the video circulated, well, some Kansas City barbecue fans said they were enraged to see the owners appearing alongside President Trump. U.S. Senator Eric Schmidt from Missouri came rushing to the defense of the joint, says it may be shocking to people, but enjoying barbecue is not a red or a blue issue. It's actually something that typically unites America. It's really unfortunate the guys are facing backlash from this mob of leftists infected with Trump derangement syndrome. I'd bet dollars to donuts they're probably closet vegans, too. I'm Todd Starnes.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, this hour, Trump has arrived in Beijing for talks with China's Xi on the Iran war, trade, and U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. So this coming from the AP. U.S. President Donald Trump arrived in Beijing on Wednesday for his hotly anticipated talks with the Chinese president on the Iran war trade and U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. The meat of the summit won't happen until tomorrow, Thursday, when leaders hold a bilateral talks and a formal banquet. But the Chinese offered Trump a pomp-filled welcome I'm sure he appreciated and loved, literally rolling out the red carpet for him after Air Force One landed in the Chinese capital. Meanwhile, the voters are focused even more on domestic issues and what a U.S. gas tax suspension could mean for drivers and the prices they see at the pump, this ahead of the midterms and coming from the AP. As steep fuel prices strain household budgets during the war with Iran, President Trump wants to suspend his government's tax on gasoline. It's a move Trump can't do on his own, and the president has yet to specify how long he'd like such a pause to last. But lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have already been pushing for a federal gas tax suspension, with some legislation in Congress now proposing a halt through October 1st. So let's welcome in Congressman Marlin Stutzman from the great state of Indiana. And amid the Chinese talks and the focus, of course, on foreign policy, when Congress is looking at the gas tax suspension, do you think that's a good idea?
Well, good morning, Jenna. Great to be with you. I'm always supportive of tax cuts. I think in this case, though, what's important is the gas tax funds. It's a user tax, and those funds go towards roads, bridges, infrastructure. And so I would want to make sure that we offset that with other cuts. And we had a great conversation last night in the Freedom Caucus when we met about all of the fraud, the waste, and the abuse of the federal government programs in Minnesota, California. And it's just becoming more and more exposed. And so, it would be easy to stop that sort of wasteful spending and apply it towards roads and bridges and replace that and still lower the gas tax while President Trump wraps up the negotiations and the war with Iran. So I think that if it's anything that gives relief to American taxpayers, it's good, but it's really the responsibility of Congress to be sure that we don't that we still have to fund making sure the roads are repaved and the bridges are strong and making this a priority. And this is what goes back to having balanced budgets. In Indiana, our Governor Braun, he actually did suspend the gas tax, but we had a balanced budget. And so that makes that job a lot easier to do when you have a balanced budget. But in Washington, of course, we have deficits and debt. And so I think this is an opportunity for us to make out what are the priorities for the American people. And right now, relief at the pump would be a big help.
Yeah, and maybe, Congress won't fund things like Arab Sesame Street and, other priorities that DOJ evidenced, that really aren't things that Congress should be funding anyway. So is there a debate and discussion on both sides of the aisle agreeing on where this tax cut could actually come from?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it would be focusing on that the abuse of those programs. Just like Medicaid reimbursements to California, it's $160 billion a year. And that number, $160 billion, it's more than the entire state government's budget in Florida, which Florida is a big state.
Wow.
And so that's where I was talking to Congressman Tim Burchett this morning about the DOJ caucus. That was one of the best things that we had as a tool that was information to us on the Budget Committee and in Congress, where we could actually see where funds were going so that way we can address it. That's been part of the problem, Jenna, in Congress, is that the executive branch, and this is bad under the Obama administration especially, and under the Biden administration, you can't get answers of where are the funds actually going. We've appropriated it, we've authorized it, but the executive branch is the one that actually disperses the funds. And what I believe has happened is that just like up in Minnesota with the Somalian community, that's what they're used to in Somalia. They're used to the government being the distributor of funds. They're the revenue generators. And so to them, this is just normal. Well, in America, that's not how we do it, and it's fraud. and it's abuse of taxpayer dollars. So that's where we're going to focus a lot on, as Congress moves so slowly. And again, I don't know if we can get it past the filibuster in the Senate because Democrats don't want to give President Trump a win on anything. I think it's going to be a real challenge because Democrats will oppose it.
Which really would give Republicans an opportunity to message that ahead of the midterms, because so many people are focused on gas prices. And even here in Florida, I mean, I've seen it go up. And, not insignificantly. And so if that's something that Democrats are halting just because they don't want to give Trump a win ahead of the midterms, that really needs to be called out. And when you look at the federal gas tax is roughly, at least, according to some reports I've seen here online, is about 18.4 cents per gallon. And so economists estimate consumers would see about 13 cents of savings at the pump because some suppliers could absorb some of that difference. And then the economists are asking, okay, does that really matter? Well, yeah. I mean, if it went down 13 cents, people would notice that. I mean, I notice when it's, even down or you get your, 10 cents a gallon off because you're a subscriber or whatever. That actually really does matter. And so are Republicans prepared to tell Democrats, hey, if you hold this up, we're going to make sure that the American people know that it's you and hold you accountable for that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's what President Trump does so well. He has the ear to the ground and what the American people are needing. I mean, whether it's the housing situation and stopping the institutional investors from buying houses away from single-family homes. That was something that a lot of people don't talk about, and all of a sudden President Trump does, and everybody's like, yeah, that makes sense. And then, of course, suspending the gas tax. Now, Democrats, of course, how hypocritical when gas prices were still higher under Joe Biden without any conflict in the Middle East because of their energy policy and the Green New Deal scam that were driving prices up. Of course, President Biden, of course, blocked the Keystone Pipeline, one of his first executive orders when he became president. So they drove gas prices up. Now Chuck Schumer is blaming President Trump for high gas prices. Well, that's what they wanted when they were in charge, and that wasn't even over, keeping America safe. So the hypocrisy is so, rank right now from the Democrat side, but we as Republicans need to look out for the American consumer, look out for the American family, and say, look, if we can suspend the gas tax, take money back from these states that are abusing welfare programs, put that towards roads and bridges, we could do this easily and give some relief until the conflict is over in the Middle East.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense to me, and I hope that Congress actually gets it together, puts politics aside, and actually does what's in the best interest of the American people. And moving to a different story that I want your comments on as well, Representative Marlin Stutzman, my special guest this morning, you were in attendance at the White House Correspondents Dinner and heard the gunshots. What was your experience there, and now seeing the aftermath of all of this? I mean, the shooter, of course, has pled not guilty, and the process is unfolding. But what was your experience and your overall thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, it was a scary night. I've been in danger before, and I've had death threats and things like that, like a lot of other members of Congress have had. But we were actually just sitting down for the White House Correspondents Dinner. And I remembered, after everything happened that night, thinking back through how security was it was lax. I mean, I know if you go to an event at the White House to see the president, or the president's even just on the grounds, you have to have your ID out. You have to check it against the registry. If your name is misspelled, they pull you to the side and they run verification to be sure you're the right person. We just had this little invitation card, like 3x5, that we just flashed at different perimeters going into the Hilton Hotel. And the other thing is, Jenna, is that this is a hotel. It's a huge hotel. It's got 1,000 rooms, this huge ballroom, and there were people everywhere. And so the fact that this shooter got in as far as he did is there's a lot of questions around that. And even going back and looking at the video, It looks like maybe he shot one of the Secret Service agents as he's coming through the magnetometers, but one of the dogs was actually sniffing him out, and it looks like the dog was actually onto him until he was pulled away by the handler of the dog. So I think there's just a lot of questions around all of it. I mean, he stumbled and fell. How the man is alive today, I don't know, because he was on a suicide mission from all appearances. But I was sitting towards the back, just sat down after the color guard left, the national anthem was sung, and immediately, when we heard the shots, we knew immediately it was gunshots. I mean, it was just pop, 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 and we all hit the deck. The ladies are at our table. I've got everybody under the table. Didn't know which way the bullets were flying, so stayed down, and then I started looking around with some others just to be sure that no one was coming into the room. And then, of course, all of the Secret Service and security started. They were automatically in place. But the security out by the entrances, I think there's questions. The guys that stood in front of President Trump and was willing to give his life in that moment, it was impressive. And ironically, that man who was standing there wasn't getting a paycheck because Democrats didn't want to fund DHS, but he was still doing his job. And so I give a lot of kudos to our law enforcement and Secret Service, but somebody should be held, at least be asked questions, why the security was lax going in. I heard some of the ladies even say that their purses weren't even looked inside. And here you have the President of the United States, so many cabinet members. But one thing I'll just quickly say, I think especially with the liberal media and the fake news that we often talk about, they were all in that room. And there was a moment of vulnerability. And I hope they all remember, that words are powerful and that words do move people. And it seems lately that the bullets have been flying from the left. I mean, after they shot our friend Charlie Kirk, because of the words that were used against him, everybody needs to realize on the left that their words have a lot of power, and it is moving people to do stupid things like this, and it needs to stop.
Yeah, so well said. Well, we have to take a break here, but I'm so grateful that everyone was okay with that, especially, of course, President Trump. And, these kinds of things absolutely do need to stop. There are so many questions about lax security, just like there are a lot of questions around what happened in Utah with the security that obviously was lax with Charlie Kirk. And to hold not only these actors accountable, but, of course, the people who are talking about this, who are saying overtly, that they wish harm on the president or conservatives or, anyone else. I mean, that should not be tolerated in our society, and freedom of speech should not extend that far to making those kinds of threats. We'll see what happens with James Comey, who's actually been indicted because of his post that, of course, had that rhetoric. So, Congressman Marlin Stutzman, appreciate it. Follow him on X and all platforms. We'll be right back with more.
As a nurse, I primarily work with children who are abused and exploited in trafficking, and I frequently see very unfair situations. We must talk about the issue of abuse. We can't base our actions on fear. We have to be faith-informed in what we do.
The Dr. Nurse Mama Show. For more from Dr. Jessica Peck, tune in at 2 p.m. Central on American Family Radio or on the podcast page at afr.net.
Life can be hard, but we have to keep our eyes focused on Jesus. I'm Christy Graham, host of On the Ground with Samaritan's Purse, and I want to encourage you in your walk with God. Listen each week as we go behind the scenes of our work around the world. You'll be challenged and encouraged in your own faith as you hear how God is actively changing lives. Join us for On the Ground with Samaritan's Purse, Sundays at 8:30 a.m. Central, right here on American Family Radio.
Martha, Martha, you are worried and bothered about so many things, but only one thing is necessary. For Mary has chosen the good part, which shall not be taken away from her. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. After Jesus resurrected their brother, Lazarus, Martha and Mary hosted a dinner party in their Bethany home. You can imagine the excitement and the buzz that swirled through the town and the number of people who came because the rabbi had returned. Martha busied herself with preparations. Mary sat at Jesus' feet, basking in his teaching. Life's demands can easily consume our focus, but one thing is necessary, that we remain at Jesus' feet, anchored in his word.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association.
Maybe this is you too. There's enormous frustration right now with healthcare costs. It is amazing. Healthcare costs for families in the last 20 years have almost tripled, and it just keeps getting worse. All this to say, this is why MediShare is so in demand right now. People are looking for alternatives, and MediShare is proven. You can save thousands of dollars a year and actually like it more. Over 1 million Americans are now part of healthcare sharing, and MediShare is the gold standard. It's trusted, it works, it's been helping people save money and have peace of mind now for 30 plus years. It's not some big impersonal thing either. It's a community of people like you helping each other. So yeah, if you're frustrated too, here's your chance to make a refreshing change. You'll notice the difference as soon as you call. They're easy to talk to. You can get a price within 2 minutes. Here is the number. Call 833-44-BIBLE. That's 833-44-BIBLE. 833-44-BIBLE.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, there is renewed focus on the moral concerns surrounding OpenAI and ChatGPT specifically. And Florida Attorney General James Othmeyer has said OpenAI needs to be held accountable when your quote-unquote intelligence technology is designed to advise someone on how to use weapons and carry out a school shooting. There is a very big problem. This comes in the wake of the revelations that a mass shooter talked to ChatGPT and apparently and allegedly it told him to target children. So last April, when a shooter opened fire at Florida State University just weeks before graduation, he killed 2 people, a student and her professor, but a new lawsuit alleges that that killer didn't act alone, as chat logs were found between him and an unlikely partner, ChatGPT. So according to the lawsuit, it details extensive conversations in which ChatGPT suggested what guns to use, where to go on campus, and what time would put the most people at risk. And according to the complaint, ChatGPT allegedly told the shooter that the actions would be much more likely to gain national attention, quote unquote, if children are involved. Even 2 to 3 victims can draw more attention. And so the Florida Attorney General has launched a formal investigation into OpenAI, saying AI should advance mankind and not destroy it. So let's welcome in Daniel Cochrane, who is a senior fellow for Family First Technologies at the Institute of Family Studies. And, you know, while there are so many benefits to ChatGPT, to OpenAI, obviously, it is what the user wants it to be, but how much responsibility should be on the designers of the technology itself to ensure that it doesn't, these types of platforms don't actively help facilitate or encourage or give, you know, better recommendations to people who are using it for nefarious reasons?
Well, it's great to be here, Jenna. And I think it's important to recognize, once again, with these big tech companies, this isn't the first time this has happened. So just months before this tragedy, ChatGPT was involved in another incident in Canada. In fact, in British Columbia, it helped another mass shooter plan what has been considered, I believe, the second worst mass shooting in Canadian history, killed or injured, I believe, up to 27 individuals. And in that case, the transgender shooter used ChatGPT in a very similar manner as the shooter at the FSU incident to plan out the event, to target the student union. So the town square. The GPT actually told the shooter that at a particular time, I believe it was like 11:30, that was when it would be optimal to plan the attack in order to maximize casualties. So the company at that time knew that their chatbot was being used for this specific purpose. In fact, there was such concern within the ranks of OpenAI that the employees leaked their internal deliberations to the Wall Street Journal, which published some of those messages. You can go read them. I'd encourage you to. They're quite harrowing. And the company actually is talking about should we tell the Canadian Mounties of this, of the possibility that this shooter or this individual at the time, he hadn't committed the act yet. Should we tell the Mounties that this individual is actually talking about committing a crime using our chatbot? And they went through and they decided not to because it didn't meet whatever threshold they believed it should have met for them to be able to report that to law enforcement. So it underscores that the company understands, A, that this technology is being used specifically to plan crimes, specifically shootings, and B, that even though their internal systems are flagging these for them, they're often choosing to overlook them. And you can argue as to, well, why is that? I think in some cases the company wants to avoid, they're always looking to avoid, a PR challenges. But I think the reality, of course, is that for these companies, when these terrible events happen, and especially when we know that they knew about it in advance and didn't do anything, then it creates far more questions and far more problems for them. So I think when you look at that track record, it becomes clear, like, the company knew and they failed to act.
Yeah, and that absolutely should create more legal liability and responsibility because, I mean, on two different fronts. One, if ChatGPT can respond in some instances of even just political questions and say, sorry, I can't help with that. I mean, I've had that return response in a political context when it's saying, I don't want to take sides, right? Then something, then obviously the programming can be there and it should be there and lawmakers should require that and those guardrails. But then when ChatGPT has and these analysts actually see and are flagged with these conversations, there should be a much lower threshold for required reporting. And so where's the line in terms of privacy for the user, which is important, but obviously this is OpenAI as well, and reasonable regulation?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And I think what's important to note is that right under the status quo, everything you put into ChatGPT is fed back to OpenAI servers. They have access to everything you've said. And there's really not in the consumer context. We have no federal privacy framework. So the only laws that limit what they can do with that information are on the state side. And really, states have enacted most of the data privacy regulations at the state level were not enacted with AI in mind. So the reality is that these companies and their AIs are constantly monitoring these conversations, and they're using every bit of information you give them for context for advertising, but also to improve their models. So I would argue that the liability, if the company runs on that model, if their AIs run on that model of mass data collection, then there's a failure to warn because they have all the information they need to be able to deduce if you're having a conversation with an AI like GPT on how to make a bomb, they already have safeguards in place to flag, either to prevent the AI from responding or to flag the conversation to their staff. And so if they're already collecting all this data on us, then they also have to accept the responsibility. Again, I don't like that they are doing that. I think we probably need laws to prevent them from doing that. But until we get to a future where we have that kind of privacy guarantee, where our data, as an example, is localized on our devices, it's not going back to one company, then I think they have to have the responsibility. You want to be the big player, you want to be the big tech monopoly. Okay. Well, if you're going to do that, then, with much power comes much responsibility in this case. And so they obviously knew what was happening. Their staff knew what was happening, and they failed to act. And this is twice in just a handful of months. So I think that's really, really telling as to their culpability here.
Yeah, and so with this lawsuit then that's been filed, how do you anticipate the defenses to go for ChatGPT and this potential outcome? Because with everything that you're describing, Daniel Cochrane, it seems like there is an obvious failure to warn.
Oh, absolutely. I think the fact that this similar tragedy occurred in Canada, I mean, literally, just weeks, a couple of months before this, and they said the same thing. They internally knew what was going on. The staff came clean, and Jim Altman, the usual, we are so sorry. We should have done this differently. We should have. We immediately raised our safeguards, and that's what he said. And then this happens, right? And so I think what we're seeing is, over and over again, what is the pattern that the tech companies follow, right? Their technologies cause terrible harms, then they apologize. Mm-hmm. And then pretty much the same thing keeps happening. And now they think that they could just do that forever. But what we've seen recently, and especially in other lawsuits in California and in New Mexico that have address some of the more addictive features of social media, as an example, these companies are starting to be held accountable in courts. And as that happens more and more, especially with these AI companies, I suspect that's going to incentivize them to change their ways. But ultimately, I think Congress and the states need to act legislatively. But in the meantime, the courthouse doors are open to these victims and their families, and I think that is so important for accountability and justice here.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully some of these verdicts may incentivize AI to remodel, some of their practices just based on that rather than even legislation. But, from the federal level, it is important, and I agree with Vice President J.D. Vance that, America needs to be on the leadership of this and out in front in terms of proper AI regulation. And so how does the Bill of Rights, or sort of, what the Trump administration has characterized as the AI Bill of Rights, factor into all of this in terms of potentially some privacy, but then obviously balanced with public safety and public interest in ensuring that some of these things are reported? Because I would want to know that. I mean, just as an American citizen, if somebody's using ChatGPT for a nefarious purpose like this, there should be mandatory reporting laws, and I would want ChatGPT to have access to those conversations for that purpose. So there's a balancing interest, of course.
No, of course, and I think the Trump administration has their AI framework makes clear, and the president has said over and over again, we have to win the AI race with China, but part of winning the AI race with China is protecting children, conservatives, creators, and communities. And so the 4 C's, if you will. And I want to underscore that because I think oftentimes conservatives, I'm a free market conservative too, and I think free markets are great, but free markets assume that we have certain conditions, right? We have rule of law. We have institutions that inculcate morals, right? We have companies that are acting ethically. And unfortunately, as we can see from this incident, we don't have that. And we don't have that from the most powerful companies in the world. And so what we have to now do is we have to create legislative safeguards to ensure that technology is being used and being governed in ways that uplift American values and the American people rather than continuing to rend our social fabric. And we've already seen that with kind of, if you will, AI 1.0, which was the social media companies and all the damage that's done to our republic. So I think we ought to learn from that, and we ought to go into this saying, oh, look, we're not going to regulate like Europe. That's a terrible idea. But, the brilliance of America's founders is our federalist system, where we have 50 different laboratories of democracy that can experiment with different ways of striking the balance. And I think you see red states like Texas, you see Florida, you see Utah. They're taking bold action in this space. Governor DeSantis's proposed AI Bill of Rights would be a great step in that direction. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to empower our laboratories of democracy to continue to take action here.
Totally agree, and I think we need that on the state level. Daniel Cochrane, really appreciate it. We're already out of time. You can reach me and my team, Jenna at afr.net.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.